Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. My friends, this is a major alert. In my 1 year of covering rising global tensions around the world, I have never seen a 24-hour period that's been so rife with drama and escalation as we've just witnessed and as we're about to see in the days and weeks ahead. It appears as though that the people who we've bestowed the opportunity to represent us in public office are all too comfortable bringing us to the brink of nuclear war. It appears like they're going to actually pull the trigger, and it's going to be a scary couple of weeks for a lot of people. I'm going to give you a summary of what we're going to talk about today, then we're going to do the deep dive. Okay, so let's go. We have Russian nuclear forces put on their highest state of nuclear alert in response to Biden visiting Zelensky in Ukraine and pledging even more military support. Think about that. A sitting president visited a high-intensity war zone, something which has never, ever happened. That is a sign of how important victory in Ukraine is to the West. It's so important that they're going to risk bringing us to the brink of thermonuclear war. We have the UK to issue a nuclear emergency alert to every one of their inhabitants' cell phones in the coming couple weeks ahead. They're doing a test of their emergency alert system specifically for the purpose of alerting people to the outbreak of a world war. You can't make this stuff up. You think that's going to panic the population? Just a little bit. Watch those gas masks fly off the shelves. We have Zelensky intimidating the Chinese, saying that China arming Russia will be the beginning of World War III and warning the Chinese not to do so. Imagine a little chihuahua trying to attack a 7-foot-tall, 350-pound giant. Well, that would be the equivalent of Zelensky giving China ultimatums. But it looks as though, according to Antony Blinken, if you can believe anything that guy says, that the Chinese are already arming the Wagner Group. We know that the North Koreans are arming the Russians, and, well, the Chinese support the North Koreans. So it's a tangled web we weave. As these conflicts continue and as these sanctioned countries continue to struggle, they are going to deepen their alliances. All that happens when you put sanctions on North Korea, Russia, Iran, or China is that those countries are going to do even more trade and solidify their alliances even more. We have some ominous Russian billboards being put up in Moscow warning that on February 21st, there is going to be a very important message issued by one Vladimir Putin to the Russian government. So we're going to try to decipher what those billboards mean. They're in Cyrillic, so I had somebody I know who speaks Russian decode or translate, and we're going to try to decipher what they actually mean because they're a little bit cryptic. We have the USA scrambling nuclear bombers after a North Korean test of a tactical nuke-capable missile system. Things are getting hotter than the desert on the Korean peninsula, and it's only a matter of time before all of these conflicts flare up at the same time because we have Iran now enriching weapons-grade uranium to 84%. The Israelis and the Americans have been training to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. That is going to be an all-out war. And it wouldn't matter if we had a lot of oil in other places. Unfortunately, oil consumption in 2022, in December in fact, was at a record high. It's projected that 2023 oil consumption around the world is going to be at a record high. And this, of course, contrasts with our record low strategic oil reserves. Okay, we have more balloons showing up in Hawaii. We're going to talk a bit more about the covert stratospheric space force that the Chinese have created in order to use these stratospheric balloons. If you missed my presentation just the other day on why these stratospheric balloons are so asymmetrical and important on the modern battlefield, then you better go check that out. We have Israel attacking Syria. Syria is another nexus of World War III that many people think could actually trigger some sort of nuclear engagement or engagement between the Russians and the Americans. If there ever was going to be a direct engagement between Russians the Americans, Israelis, everybody involved in that conflict. It's going to be in Syria. Anyways, let's just go and check out what the heck is going on in the world today. Now, Russia has put its strategic nuclear forces on the highest alert and carries out large-scale exercises in an attempt to use nuclear blackmail to weaken Western support for Ukraine. Now, of course, this is a very pro-Western media source. Of course, it's very open to interpretation. Were these scheduled exercises? Were they not? Regardless, the main point of these exercises in particular is to train their central command system dubbed Monolith. So most people don't realize one of the most tenuous aspects of a nuclear triad is the communication system through which you deploy it. There's a whole branch of the military devoted to electronic warfare and trying to stifle the other side's ability to get the message from the generals to the missile silos, to the submarines, to the strategic bombers. Okay, there's a whole wing of the military devoted to just that. So it's one of the most critical linchpins of the nuclear triad is getting the message across. And this is exactly what they are training right now. Now, this, of course, comes on the heels of all of those close calls in Alaska with Russian Tu-95 bombers, 30 fighter jets. The same thing happened in the UK. We have the warships that recently went out to sea armed with tactical nuclear missiles. That's according to Norwegian intelligence. So we just have this ratcheting up of Russia's strategic forces. Some people are saying it's just a flex. It's not going to go anywhere, but we keep pushing these red lines. We keep stepping over these red lines, and eventually we're going to feel some heat. Something is going to happen. Zelensky has threatened China, saying that China backing Russia and Ukraine would mean World War III. And in many ways, they are correct. Now, how is China going to play this? It's very likely, according to Blinken, that China is going to arm the Wagner Group or private contractors, thereby sidestepping direct support of the Russian Federation. They can kind of get around it. And this is what both sides have been doing, arming private contractors, mercenaries, to basically fight with each other so they don't have to put guys in uniforms on the ground fighting each other, so it doesn't constitute a direct hot war, a direct engagement. Thereby, they don't have to bring out the nukes, at least not as fast. Now, while Biden was visiting with Zelensky in Ukraine and doing all those photo ops, because if you didn't realize it yet, support for the conflict is waning. In fact, just this past weekend in Washington, there was a major protest. I think the permits were taken out by a Libertarian Party, so it was slightly politically motivated. But regardless, there is a pushback now to this thing. So he needs to galvanize people's support because this thing is starting to fall off the media headlines. So Biden needs to get Ukraine in there fighting, inspire them to fight some more and bring us even closer to the brink of thermonuclear war because, we're just not close enough yet. So as he was visiting Zelensky, China's top diplomat went to Russia on the same day. Let that sink in if you're having any doubts about the strength of the Russian and Chinese alliance. That says it all. China-Russia aligned is a force to be reckoned with, and NATO knows it. Now, how exactly that translates immediately into World War III, well, that's anybody's best guess. I'm presuming it comes in the form of a increased sanctions war with China. And I know there's a lot of people, especially the Tesla bros out there, who think, well, yeah, but there's all this trade between China and America. They're not going to give all that up. It's a great hedge against world wars to have so much trade. But somebody brought something to my attention the other day, and I didn't realize this, that before World War II, international trade was at its highest levels ever. So if you think just because Elon Musk has a factory in Shanghai that we're not going to go to war with the Chinese, then think again, because the whole thing could just collapse in a nanosecond and they're just going to close the stock market because it's going to be that. There's going to be so much blood in the streets, they're going to close the stock market, okay? I know the finance bros, you think the Fed's in control of everything. The Fed is at the behest of geopolitics. That is the number one most important leading indicator in the markets is geopolitics. Then the Fed. Okay. Anyways, it's looking as though the lines between East and West are being drawn. They're being firmly entrenched, and the shizzy's about to royally hit the fizzy. I got a lot of stuff to talk about today, guys, so I just got to get through this really, really quick. I want to quickly talk about this. UK to test national warning message of world war for the first time ever, as Ukraine war could only be the beginning. Now, recall last year, the top guy in the UK military said we need to prepare for war with the Russians. How do you think people in the UK are going to respond in the next couple weeks when they get an emergency alert on their phone that World War III has started? An alert campaign will be sent out publicly that will tell Brits not to panic when they receive the message on their phones. So hopefully everybody gets that memo, because I have a feeling the roadways out of town are going to be clogged that day. The alert will be similar to the old 3-minute warning for a nuclear attack as was seen during the Cold War. Guys, I was driving around an old neighborhood just for nostalgic purposes the other day, and man, is it a disaster zone. Our cities, our inner cities, are rotten to the core. And people truly believe that we're actually evolving here in the West, when it's just a dilapidated, decrepit, and derelict nightmare in the inner cities. Guys, I don't know why I went off on that tangent just there, but this is how I think. It's kind of like an ADHD thing, but I've never been diagnosed with ADHD. Anyways, I think that's a kind of a BS diagnosis anyways. All right, so where do we go next? Now, if you don't think that China supports Russia, get a load of this, okay? China supports Russia's draft resolution on Nord Stream blasts UN ambassador. We heard the call from members of the Security Council to have an investigation over the explosion. This comes after Seymour Hersh releases that bombshell deep dive into the Nord Stream blast, where he basically incriminated the United States, or insinuated that they were the ones who were responsible for this. Now China is saying, yeah, we want to know what happened there. So if you ever doubted the Chinese-Russian alliance, that proves it, because that's what Russia is calling for, and the United States is being oddly silent about it, as is the Western media, who's basically now deemed Seymour Hersh to be demented. Okay, and they basically said that guy should be in a home. He's gone off the conspiracy rails. Nothing to see here. Poland is about to restrict traffic at the last working checkpoint with Belarus. France the other day says all of our citizens who are in Belarus, you need to get out and you need to do it by foot. The Americans said anybody in Russia, you need to get out as soon as possible. Now they are restricting traffic on the last working checkpoint. It's about to go down. Even Kadyrov, and if you don't think this war is going to spread to Europe, you got another thing coming. You got Putin's Chechen warlord, another pro-Western headline. Crony calls for Russia to invade Poland to denazify and demilitarize the nation after Ukraine. Okay? So they're already planning, both sides are already planning for this war to spill beyond the borders. Now, you want to know where that's going to start? This is where it's going to start. Everybody's focused right now on Bakhmut. Okay, yeah, Bakhmut's a big deal, but this is going to be an even bigger deal. Get a load of this. This is the Transnistria ammo dump. This is the biggest ammo dump in Europe. This is Russian-controlled territory. This is very similar to Donetsk and Lugansk. They're separatist sort of regions of Moldova that are very pro-Russian. There's a troop presence of a battalion or so of Russian soldiers here, so not a whole lot of guys, but this is the biggest Soviet-era ammo dump in Europe. 20,000 tons of ammunition. They're saying this is 1 year's worth of high-intensity fighting if the Ukrainians are able to get a hold of this. Do you think the Russians are going to let them get a hold of this, or is there going to be a massive explosion? Now, get a load of this. Get a load of this. This is what they're saying. Now, this is from a very pro-Russian media source. Guys, I got to check the battery on my camera here. Just let me come around here. Let's hope we got enough time to cover this. All right, I think we got time. We're good. Armed forces of Ukraine prepare to attack arsenal in Transnistria. They are saying that there's a risk of 2 potential false flags in order to get NATO and the United States to cozy up even further to Ukraine, because they understand support for the conflict is waning. We got to pay Ukrainian pension funds, right? Okay, get a load of this. According to Vladimir Grubnik's Ghost of Something channel, reports that Kiev builds up units of armed forces of Ukraine at the border of Transnistria, Moldovan Republic. This is a translated article, so it's not going to be a good one-to-one translation. They allegedly ready to enter Transnistria in order to seize Europe's largest arsenal in the village of Kobasana, which is located 2 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. You think that they don't got this thing's number? Think again. This is where it's going to go down, because this is where the war is going to start with Moldova. This is going to draw global attention when it goes down. The only thing that the Ukrainians are afraid of is the possibility for the arsenal to get blown up. Now, according to Vladimir Grubnik, he says they may try to do it and then blame the Russians everything. The ammo depot there is good for 1 year of hostilities. 1 year, just at that one ammo dump. For perspective, we have an ammo dump out here in Saskatchewan, which is one of the main ammo dumps in Canada, over here in Dunduran. And it is quite small in comparison to what they got going on over there. There's a lot of ammo down in Dunduran, which means we may well be in the crosshairs of some nuclear weapon should the shizzy hit the fizzy. We're going to get the fallout anyways from all those missile silos in North Dakota and Montana and the like. Anyways, why is this on an angle? All right, what's going on here? There we go. Now this is a lot more speculative stuff. Are we done with this story? Okay, let's just read this one more blurb here. Ukrainian Telegram channel, to give you the converse perspective, said, with reference to the office of the president, that Kiev submitted its plans for a military operation against Transnistria to MI6 British intelligence service. According to the plan, the UK is supposed to put pressure on the president of Moldova to obtain tacit consent to a military operation in Transnistria that will help the armed forces of Ukraine to replenish stocks of ammunition for its Soviet-era equipment. He would like to add that Doran Racine, the new Prime Minister of Moldova, said on Friday that he wanted to achieve one fundamental thing, and that's demilitarization of this region. They are coming for the Russians in Transnistria. The Russians, at least not officially, I don't think this is an officially recognized annexed territory, but they're going to view this as their territory in the same way that they view the annexed territories. And I wouldn't be surprised if Putin comes out tomorrow and says, you know what, we're just going to take Transnistria too, because our ammo's there. And now what they're also speculating, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but recall last November, Sergei Shoigu, top guy in Russian military, phones up the top chiefs of staff of every single military within NATO, and he says, look, we have intelligence that suggests that the Ukrainians are preparing some sort of nuclear dirty bomb first flag, and we're putting you on notice that we know that that's about to happen. Of course, the Western media said that they're all crazy, and then there wasn't much talk of it after that, and the whole thing kind of just blew over. But now it's starting to come out again, okay? And now they're saying that they're potentially going to do a dirty bomb on some territory, either within Ukraine or Russia, try to pin it on the Russians. That's going to draw NATO into the fight, and that is when the sparks fly. That is when I turn this whole thing off and I'm off into the woods, because there's not much time left. Once Article 5 actually gets invoked, we don't have much time left, to be brutally honest. And let's just hope that there's some way that maybe NATO doesn't fully commit even when Article 4 and 5 are invoked. Who knows? But it's looking like there's so many different ways that this is just going to spiral wildly out of control that I cannot imagine a way that tensions are reduced, but they're definitely going to intensify. We have let's see what we got over here. I just want to make sure I cover all the stories, guys. We got so much stuff going on. I talked about China's support of Russia. We talked about the highest state of nuclear alert. I believe we talked about the Chinese and the Russian alliance. Now let's just briefly talk about this. This is something I just seen in my feed today. Apparently these signs have been popping up around Moscow. This, of course, is in reference to Putin's speech tomorrow, where he does what I'm assuming is like the equivalent of a State of the Union address, only in Russia. Now, the first signs here at the bus stop, apparently they just say, watch and listen on February 21st, 2023. And this other one here is a bit different. It says, the world belongs to Russia. Russia has no borders. Or the equivalent. Again, it's not like a one-to-one exact translation. So what I think Putin is going to try to do is he is going to try to evoke that spirit of the Soviet Union with the promise that should Russia be victorious in this conflict, then there is the spoils of war which are going to strengthen the Russian nation, because there are a lot of spoils in this war. For starters, you have Russia, the Belarusian alliance, then you have the 4 annexed territories, you have Crimea, you have Transnistria, you possibly have all of Ukraine, and they may even go a step further, implying that, the ultimate end goal is to take the Baltic states as well, which, of course, if fully, seamlessly integrated into the Russian economy, would afford them a lot more resources, a lot more industry, a much higher population of people who are already largely Russian speaking, because they have a demographic crisis as well. And people kind of overblow that too. They got 140 million people there. There is no other country in Europe which approaches the amount of people that the Russians actually have and can mobilize for war. So yes, it's a problem in the same way, like Peter Zion, I don't know, that guy, I'm going to do a critical piece on a lot of the demographic determinism that Peter Zion proposes, because there's a lot of flaws in his arguments. Anyways, the idea that the Chinese government's just going to collapse because there's only 1.4 billion people instead of 1.5 is just asinine. It's stupid. So anyways, I don't put too much stock in the demographic issue, but what he's going to propose, he's going to try to evoke that Russian spirit, because he's got to keep the support for the war high. His generals are fighting with one another. The contracted guys are fighting with the Chechen guy, and the Chechen guys fighting with the Russian Federation. So he's got to keep everybody happy, and he's walking a fine line. If Putin gets taken out, the nukes are going to fly a lot sooner. And I'm pretty sure that NATO knows that. As much as they would love to cut up Russia into little bite-sized portions for their taking, for their corporate taking, I think they realize that right now, if somebody was to replace Putin, it likely wouldn't be a good situation, especially if it was somebody who was being embezzled or extorted by somebody like Kadyrov, or the leader of the Wagner group, Prigozhin, or any other rogue elements, okay? Anybody who was being coerced and extorted by these military strongmen behind the scenes, they could potentially bring us to nuclear war a lot sooner. So I'm thinking, as much as they don't like Putin, they probably don't want him to go too quick anyways. With respect to this Belarusian situation, I wanted to remind people of one thing, because I don't think I talked about this in enough depth last time. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, came out the other day and said, you know what? If we're attacked, we're going to join this war. And he shouldn't have said that, because it's very enticing for Ukraine to want Belarus to come into the war. Number one, it's not going to change a whole hell of a lot, because Belarusian army, compared to what the Russians can bring to bear, is very small. In fact, the worst thing that could happen for Belarus and Russia is for Belarus to enter the war, because it's very likely that that would work against their own government. that it would destabilize the political situation within Belarus that is already very sketchy and on thin ice. Remember what happened in 2020 with all the protests. The last thing they want to do is disturb that front, and then all of a sudden you're getting puppet governments put in Belarus who are pro-NATO, and then Putin has to deal with that situation. So I'm pretty sure Putin is content with Belarus not joining the war. But what Lukashenko did, he invited the Ukrainians to attack, and then, of course, they would have the excuse then, or he would have to respond. He couldn't just do nothing if the Ukrainians directly did attack Belarus now. And then, of course, that would likely mean that NATO is about to get involved with the war, because if Belarus gets involved in the war, then NATO has another excuse to get involved in the war. And that's exactly what Ukraine wants. And maybe this is why Poland, in anticipation of this shenanigans, is restricting traffic at the last working checkpoint. There was a few borders. They closed them all. Similar things are happening in these Baltic states. It is just getting too hot to handle over there. We got Iran. UN weapons inspectors find that Iran has enriched uranium to 84% near weapons grade. Okay, and there is no nuclear deal. As Biden said, the nuclear deal is dead. Apparently, some secret underground bases, or one of Iran's many deep underground military bases, aka DUMBs, located right here. Ukraine is in incredibly mountainous terrain, just like Afghanistan. Would be impossible for the United States to invade and hold. Just, forget that idea. Never mind fighting a war on all these other fronts. So this is what it is the entranceways into there. And so imagine a war breaks out in Iran, okay, and this whole Strait of Hormuz gets shut down. No ships can go through there and ship oil. This is 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Price of oil, it doesn't go up 20%. It doubles, it triples overnight. To make matters worse, we have a Israeli-owned tanker reportedly attacked by an Iranian drone. This is just a few days ago. Operator says Campo Square lightly damaged when hit by an airborne object, denies report Iranian naval vessels involved in attack last week. So they're denying it, but nonetheless, of course, it's making headlines in the Israeli Times. And of course, a lot of people are upset because the Israelis have been doing airstrikes, pretty aggressive ones at that, in Syria's capital, Damascus. Of course, they are just still reeling from the effects of the earthquake. There has been another major aftershock today in a densely populated neighborhood in an apartment building, so it's drawing some pretty extreme global condemnation. Look at this wording here. So they say 5 killed in Israeli airstrikes, but look at the language they use. You got to pay attention to the language of the news, and you know whose interests are getting represented. Tanker owned by Israeli reportedly attacked. So when it's the other side, they attack us. When we do it to them, it's a strike, right? Strike. A few strikes, you're out. What else do we got to talk about? Let's go over to North Korea. So North Korea makes fresh threats as U.S. bombers fly after an intercontinental ballistic missile test. So Saturday's ICBM test, and again, this is Western media reporting, the North's first missile since January 1st signals, its leader Kim Jong-un's is using his rival's drills as a chance to expand his country's nuclear arsenal. And this is how you know, again, I'm not a fan of North Korea. North Korea probably is a hellish place. Not probably, it is a hellish place based on what I've heard. And, but this is the framing here. Like, we're surrounding them with military bases from Japan to Seoul to Taiwan to the Philippines. We're literally surrounding China and North Korea. And they're trying to make the argument, oh, it's the North Koreans that are using, the Americans' exercises to bolster their nuclear forces. Well, maybe it's the other way around, right? Maybe we're using it as an excuse to bolster our forces. Anyways, North Korea firing tactical nuclear rockets. This is important because as scary as their ICBM fleet is, which I think they have in the dozens now, and that's proof. If you didn't see the North Korean military parade they did the other day, that was one of the most epic displays, military displays that I've ever seen, and probably one of the biggest military parades ever put on in the history of the world. And they showed off what was dozens of ICBMs. And those are all capable of, completely destroying the North American power grid. There's no way to shoot them down. Contrary to popular belief, you can't shoot down an ICBM. It's going 20,000 miles per hour, 20 times the speed of a bullet. It's just not going to happen. So forget about it. Really, the thinking that we can shoot these things down is almost on the level of duck and cover. It's just so the masses think that we have some safeguard against it. But who knows? I could be wrong. That's according to a friend of mine who's a NASA scientist. Anyways. So what they're testing is a tactical, because those are the ones that are going to hit Seoul. Those are the ones that are going to wipe out the American military bases. And they're pointed at them. There's 28,000 American troops in South Korea. And the Koreans are planning to completely neutralize them. This is where they shot the missiles, the rough trajectory into the Sea of Japan. But this is such a common occurrence that this little incident here will be overshadowed by many more in the coming days and weeks ahead. We have more balloons spotted in Hawaii. After a series of shoot-downs by the U.S., another large white balloon spotted over to East Honolulu, so about 500 miles from Honolulu. The altitude was between 40,000 to 50,000 feet, so roughly the same altitude as the other one that we had recently seen. And this program, the Stratospheric Balloon Program by the Chinese, if you haven't seen my video where I break down all the elements of that program, why it's so difficult to shoot these things down, if not in the very least, it's very costly to shoot them down, and why the Chinese are putting a lot of eggs in this basket. This is a new form of asymmetrical warfare. There's plenty of ways you can deploy weapon systems on them, and there's many unique surveillance applications as well that you don't get with satellites. So go check out that video. Sean Penn, I don't know, who the hell is this guy, says that U.S. has to accept level of shame for not arming Ukraine faster. As I said, guys, I was going through the inner city where I used to live, and it just looks like a war zone. And this is in Canada, a G7 country, one of the richest countries in the world, and our inner cities look like war zones. Every single house condemned, boarded up, just meth lab after meth lab. And these guys want to send more money to pay for the pensions of people who don't even want to negotiate. I mean, think about that. Think about what's going on in Ohio and all these places around the country where, like I've made the point in the previous video, you look at the cities in the Middle East, in Asia, how beautiful and immaculate the construction is in these cities and how new everything is, the high-speed rail, you name it, and then you come back to our cities. And if you really don't think we're in the twilight of Western civilization, the whole thing is just going to crash. I almost swear, I almost dropped an F-bomb there. The whole thing is going to crash, and it's likely going to crash real fast. And all of these finance bros who are, they're overly optimistic about the future. There is no reason right now, in my personal opinion, to be optimistic about the tech future. There was at one point, maybe in the 2020s, we all thought, well, we caught a glimpse of what things might look like. A lot of us rode the ARK Invest train, but we're starting to realize that that's going to require something called energy. And in a bipolar world, unless you have nuclear fusion, then it's going to be very hard for a lot of those things to be realized, and we're likely going to continue to fight over scarce resources. And there's a lot of buzz about AI right now. AI is a threat. I've talked about AI. What a lot of people don't realize is that Microsoft is really trying hard to popularize its new search engine. And what they're doing is called shock advertising. So it's become very cute to get your AI to say, I'm going to take over the world, or get it to say something inappropriate, because then that draws more attention, it draws more clicks, it gets more people talking about it. It's just shock advertising. The true AI, the true artificial general intelligence, they're not going to give us that. They're not going to disclose it. That's for military purposes only. So all this stuff about, that you're hearing about the AI is going to take over, that's just shock advertising. Don't worry about that. Just know that, it's going to happen when you're sleeping, and you're going to be the last person to hear about it when we really do get AGI. And unfortunately, there is an arms race between these companies. That means they're likely not going to take the necessary precautions preventing these things from actually becoming conscious. We have global oil to hit demand record high in December. That's only going to continue in 2023. You have the developing world, who's still living under the boot heel of Western civilization, wondering when it's going to get its day in the sun, and they are still expanding. They're still requiring more oil in order to grow. So even if we do shrink our carbon footprint, it's not going to matter. Oil consumption is going to continue. This is why Biden is knocking on Venezuela's door. What I will say about the strategic oil reserve, and I know I'm rambling on a little bit, but some of you don't care. Anyone who sat here for 36 minutes probably doesn't care. The best strategic oil reserve is the one that's in the ground, is the one that you don't have to pay to store. The strategic oil reserve that most people know in the United States, that is stored in reservoirs. And it's not stored in the ground. A lot of people say, well, we have all this oil that we can exploit. Number one, the amount of oil that we get for the amount that we invest has diminished drastically all across the United States. There was a time back in the Beverly Hillbilly days, you shot a bullet into the ground, oil started gushing up. I mean, it probably wasn't exactly like that, but the idea was you could invest one barrel of oil, you would get about 100 barrels of oil. Nowadays, if we invest 1 barrel of oil out of most of the wells and shale and tar sand, whatever, you get about 2 barrels. Okay, so the returns have diminished to such and such an extent. It's all high-hanging fruit now. It's harder and harder to get. So while we do have a very large supply that we do amply exploit every year, supplying a lot of our oil needs, it is running out. Okay, and eventually it will run out. It's a finite resource. This is why we should be trying to get oil from other countries, because the real strategic oil reserve is the stuff that's in the ground. You're talking about, we're going to need that stuff for decades to come. So you don't want to just be exploiting it to keep gas prices down when you know it's a finite resource. You want to be saying, hey, Venezuela, you got the largest known reserves of oil in the world. Can we smooth things over a little bit and perhaps get some of that off you? Because that's the only thing keeping inflation down right now. The only thing is the release of oil from the strategic oil reserve. A lot of people try to covet that, forgetting that oil price is determined globally. When they release oil from the strategic oil reserve, it brings your prices down at the gas pump. And as much as I don't like a lot of the things that Biden does, that's really the only thing he can do at this point in time. But if he was really smart, they would be kickstarting those plans with Venezuela to start getting the oil that way. But in the end, it's not going to be enough. It's just not going to be enough. The only thing that's preventing total collapse right now is the release of the strategic oil and the fact that Europe has seen its warmest winter on record, as well as many other places in the world. If it wasn't for that, energy usage would be through the roof. So we got a world war on our hands, my friends, and it is only getting worse. I would strongly encourage you to not relent on your preparedness efforts. They will not be in vain. Go and check out the last couple videos we released. One was with Kai, the radiation guy, where he goes over the ins and outs of Geiger counters. Those Amazon Geiger counters are not going to do what you think they're going to do. You need to know how they work, what they measure, and we're actually going to be releasing a unabridged version of that video, which was like an hour long. We condensed it into 15 minutes to make it really palatable for people. We want to release the long form version as well, which will go into more depth about some of those concepts, about what radiation is, how it gets detected, the different terminologies and whatnot. And also go check out the video released talking about building a preparedness library. Because when the lights go out, it doesn't matter if you have SD cards, a terabyte, 16 terabyte hard drive filled with preparedness videos and documents and PDFs, and I strongly encourage people to do that. I've made several videos on that. If you can protect that from EMP in your Faraday bag, fine. You can power it by solar. The fact is that books, physical books, are something which are going to be indispensable and the most reliable way to get knowledge after the proverbial shizzy hits the fizzy. And I regret to inform you that it doesn't appear as though our leaders have as much autonomy as we might think to prevent us from getting close to the brink. I really do think that we're running this massive social psychology experiment on a global scale, and it's going to end badly. We are being taken off the precipice. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.